You're walking through the bustling market squares of Tenochtitlan in 1519, the largest city in the Americas. The air fills with the aroma of exotic spices, the chatter of merchants hawking jade and obsidian, and the distant sound of drums echoing from the towering pyramids that dominate the skyline. Children laugh as they chase each other between the stalls, while artisans display their intricate featherwork and golden ornaments. This is a civilization at its peak, more sophisticated than most European cities of the time, with advanced engineering, complex astronomy, and breathtaking architecture that rivals anything the old world has ever produced. But beneath this veneer of cultural brilliance lies something that will haunt human history forever. Something so systematic, so deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, that it challenges our understanding of civilization itself. As you wander deeper into the ceremonial center, past the great temple that rises like a man-made mountain toward the heavens, you begin to notice something else. The steps are stained dark. The air carries a metallic scent that mingles uneasily with the incense. And towering above everything else, casting shadows across the plaza, stand structures that defy comprehension. Racks upon racks of human skulls, thousands upon thousands of them, arranged with methodical precision like some macabre library of the dead. Welcome to the world of Aztec human sacrifice, where the sacred and the horrific intersected in ways that continue to disturb and fascinate us 5 centuries later. Today, we're going to journey into the heart of these rituals, examining not just what happened, but why an advanced civilization believed that feeding human hearts to the gods was essential for the survival of the universe itself. The story we're about to tell isn't just ancient history. It's a window into the human capacity for both extraordinary cultural achievement and unthinkable cruelty. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about civilization, religion, and the lengths to which societies will go when they believe their very existence depends on appeasing forces beyond their control. Before we dive into the brutal details, we need to understand that what we're examining here isn't random violence or primitive barbarism. This was a sophisticated theological system backed by centuries of tradition, complex mythology, and unwavering religious conviction. The Aztecs didn't sacrifice humans because they were cruel or backward. They did it because they genuinely believed that without these offerings, the sun would stop moving across the sky, the rains would cease, and the world itself would come to an end. The archaeological evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. Since the late 1970s, excavations throughout Mexico City have uncovered physical proof that validates even the most extreme Spanish accounts. At the site of the Great Temple alone, archaeologists have discovered the remains of at least 603 human skulls arranged in towers and racks. These aren't isolated incidents or exaggerated colonial propaganda. These are systematic patterns of ritual killing that occurred on a scale unlike anything else in human history. But how did it all begin? To understand Aztec sacrifice, we must first understand their cosmology, their fundamental beliefs about how the universe operated. According to Aztec mythology, the world had been created and destroyed 4 times before the current age. Each previous world had ended in catastrophe because the gods had been insufficiently nourished by human offerings. The 5th sun, their current world, could only survive if humanity provided constant sustenance to the deities who maintained the cosmic order. At the center of this belief system stood Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. Every morning, Huitzilopochtli fought a battle against the forces of darkness. If he lost this battle, if he became too weak to continue his eternal struggle, night would triumph permanently and all life would cease. The only way to strengthen him for this daily combat was through human hearts and blood, the most precious substances that mortals could offer. Think about the psychological weight of this belief. Imagine living in a world where you genuinely believed that your neighbors, your children, your entire civilization depended on feeding fresh human hearts to the sun god every single day. The pressure, the religious obligation, the sheer terror of what might happen if you failed to provide adequate offerings. This wasn't superstition to the Aztecs. This was scientific fact, as certain as gravity or the changing of seasons. The rituals themselves were conducted with a precision and methodology that speaks to their central importance in Aztec society. The primary method was heart extraction, performed at the summit of temple pyramids before crowds of thousands. The victim, often a captured warrior from enemy tribes, would be stretched across a curved stone altar called a shakmul. 4 priests would hold down the limbs while a 5th, armed with a razor-sharp obsidian knife, would make a precise cut through the abdomen and up through the diaphragm. The obsidian blade deserves special attention here. These weren't crude stone implements. Obsidian, when properly knapped, creates edges sharper than modern surgical steel. The Aztec priests who performed these rituals were master craftsmen who had spent years perfecting their technique. They could slice through skin, muscle, and bone with surgical precision, extracting a still-beating heart in seconds. The entire procedure required not just physical skill, but anatomical knowledge that rivaled anything available in medieval Europe. The heart, torn from the chest while still pulsing with life, would be held high toward the sun, offered to Huitzilopochtli as sustenance for his daily battle. The blood would be smeared on sacred idols and altars, while the body would be thrown down the pyramid steps to waiting priests below. But the ritual didn't end there. The body would be flayed, the skin carefully removed to be worn by other priests in subsequent ceremonies. The flesh would be distributed among the nobility and warrior class, consumed in sacred meals that were believed to provide spiritual communion with the gods themselves. These weren't random acts of violence. They were carefully orchestrated ceremonies that could last for days, involving elaborate costumes, ritual dancing, musical performances, and precise timing coordinated with astronomical events. The festival of Xiumolpili, held every 52 years, involved the sacrifice of thousands of victims in a single ceremony designed to ensure the renewal of the cosmic cycle. The scale becomes even more staggering when we examine the infrastructure built to support these rituals. The tzompantli, or skull racks, weren't temporary displays. They were permanent architectural features, carefully engineered structures designed to hold thousands of human skulls simultaneously. Spanish conquistador Andrés de Tapia described towers made entirely of mortared skulls flanking the Great Temple, with a massive wooden rack between them displaying an estimated 130,000 additional skulls. Recent archaeological discoveries have confirmed that these accounts, once dismissed as colonial exaggeration, were largely accurate. The Huey Tzompantli discovered in modern Mexico City contains over 600 skulls arranged in systematic patterns, representing just a fraction of what once existed. DNA analysis reveals that these victims came from across the Aztec Empire and beyond, evidence of a tribute system that demanded human lives from conquered territories. But perhaps most disturbing of all were the child sacrifices performed for Tlaloc, the rain god. These rituals were based on the belief that children's tears were essential for bringing rain during the dry season. Archaeological evidence from the Great Temple reveals the remains of at least 42 children, many showing signs of prolonged torture, designed specifically to extract maximum suffering and tears before death. The children, typically between 3 and 7 years old, would be purchased from their mothers or taken as tribute from conquered lands. The priests would deliberately inflict pain to ensure continuous weeping, believing that the volume of tears directly correlated to the amount of rain Tlaloc would provide. Some children were drowned in sacred cenotes, while others had their hearts extracted in ceremonies timed to coincide with the agricultural calendar. The cruelty was methodical, calculated, and considered absolutely essential for the survival of Aztec civilization. What makes this even more chilling is the bureaucratic nature of it all. The Aztec state maintained detailed records of sacrificial victims, organizing elaborate supply chains to ensure adequate numbers of people for upcoming ceremonies. Tribute lists from conquered territories specifically demanded quotas of young men and women for sacrificial purposes. Military campaigns were planned not just for territorial expansion, but to capture prisoners for ritual killing. The psychological impact on Aztec society must have been profound. Children grew up knowing that capture in war meant almost certain death in the most gruesome manner possible. Parents lived with the constant fear that their offspring might be selected for sacrifice to Tlaloc. Warriors fought with desperate courage, knowing that defeat meant not just death, but ritual humiliation and consumption by their enemies. Yet, within this system of institutionalized terror, the Aztecs created one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history. They built cities larger than Paris, developed complex mathematical and astronomical systems, created art of breathtaking beauty, and established trade networks that spanned the Americas. The same hands that crafted delicate featherwork and precise calendars also wielded obsidian blades to tear out human hearts. This contradiction forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the relationship between civilization and cruelty. How do we reconcile the artistic genius that created the breathtaking murals of Teotihuacan with the methodical precision required to extract a human heart in under 30 seconds? How do we understand a society that could engineer floating gardens to feed 1 million people while simultaneously organizing the systematic torture of children to ensure rainfall? The answers lie not in dismissing the Aztecs as primitive barbarians, but in recognizing the terrifying logic that drove their actions. Every aspect of Aztec sacrifice was rooted in what they considered empirical observation. When they sacrificed prisoners before battle, and subsequently won victories, this confirmed the effectiveness of their offerings. When they failed to provide adequate sacrifices and subsequently faced droughts or military defeats, this proved the gods required more sustenance. From their perspective, human sacrifice wasn't barbaric cruelty. It was applied theology, as rational and necessary as any modern scientific practice. The training of sacrificial priests reveals the sophisticated nature of these rituals. Young men selected for religious service would spend years learning anatomy, studying the precise locations of major organs, practicing the swift movements necessary to extract a beating heart. They memorized complex ceremonial procedures, learned to read astronomical signs that determined optimal timing for different types of sacrifices, and mastered the art of flaying human skin so skillfully that the removed hide could be worn as a complete garment. These priests held positions of tremendous social prestige. They were scholars, astronomers, doctors, and theologians rolled into one. Their knowledge of human anatomy surpassed that of most European physicians of the same period. They could predict eclipses, calculate agricultural cycles, and perform surgical procedures with remarkable precision. Yet this same expertise was applied to the systematic killing of thousands of human beings. The variety of sacrificial methods employed by the Aztecs demonstrates the complexity of their religious thinking. Different gods required different types of offerings, each with specific procedures designed to honor particular divine attributes. Warriors captured in battle were typically sacrificed to Huitzilopochtli through heart extraction, their blood feeding the sun god's strength. But victims offered to Tlaloc, the rain god, were often drowned in sacred pools or had their fingernails removed to increase their tears. For Xipe-Totec, the flayed god of agricultural renewal, victims were shot with arrows, their blood dripping onto the earth to ensure fertility. The priests would then carefully remove the victim's skin in a single piece, wearing it for 20 days during spring planting ceremonies. The symbolism was deliberate. Just as seeds must be planted beneath the earth's surface to grow, so human skin must be worn over living flesh to ensure the renewal of life. Perhaps most disturbing was the Xiauhmal Pili, the new fire ceremony held every 52 years to ensure the continuation of the current cosmic age. As the critical night approached, all fires throughout the empire were extinguished, leaving the population in complete darkness. At midnight, priests would cut open the chest of a specially selected victim on a mountaintop outside Tenochtitlan. If they could successfully kindle a new fire in the victim's chest cavity using friction sticks, the world would continue for another 52 years. If they failed, darkness would reign forever. The psychological terror of this moment must have been overwhelming. Hundreds of thousands of people across the empire would wait in absolute darkness, their entire cosmological worldview hanging on whether priests could light a fire inside a human chest. When the flames finally appeared, signaling success, runners would carry torches to every city and village, rekindling the hearths that sustained daily life. The relief must have been indescribable, confirming once again that human sacrifice had literally saved the world from destruction. The economic implications of this system were staggering. The Aztec Empire maintained vast networks dedicated solely to procuring sacrificial victims. Tribute payments from conquered territories included specific quotas of young men and women earmarked for ritual killing. Professional slave traders specialized in acquiring children for ceremonies honoring Tlaloc. Military campaigns were planned around religious calendars, ensuring adequate prisoners would be available for upcoming festivals. The city of Tenochtitlan itself was designed around sacrificial infrastructure. The Great Temple dominated the urban landscape, its twin shrines dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc rising over 150 feet above the surrounding plaza. Multiple, smaller temples throughout the city hosted daily sacrificial rituals, while the Tzompantli served as permanent reminders of the empire's religious obligations. The entire urban environment was organized to facilitate the systematic killing of human beings. Recent archaeological discoveries continued to reveal the scope of these practices. In 2018, researchers uncovered a ritual deposit beneath Mexico City containing over 650 skulls arranged in careful patterns. DNA analysis revealed victims ranging from local residents to prisoners brought from territories hundreds of miles away. Some skulls showed evidence of trepanation, surgical procedures performed while the victims were still alive, suggesting that certain sacrifices involved prolonged medical torture disguised as religious ritual. The discovery of sacrificial knives throughout central Mexico provides insight into the tools used for these ceremonies. Obsidian blades were crafted with extraordinary skill, their edges honed to molecular sharpness. The handles were often decorated with intricate mosaics depicting gods and mythological scenes, transforming instruments of death into objects of breathtaking artistic beauty. These weren't crude weapons, but sophisticated surgical implements created by master craftsmen who took pride in their deadly work. But perhaps most chilling are the remains of the victims themselves. Forensic analysis reveals that many sacrificial subjects were kept alive for extended periods before their deaths, fed special diets, and given medical treatment to ensure they remained healthy until their appointed time. Children destined for Tlaloc were often fattened for months, their tears considered more precious when they came from well-nourished bodies. Warriors selected for heart extraction were sometimes housed in temple complexes for weeks, treated as honored guests before their violent deaths. The Spanish accounts, once dismissed as propaganda, have been largely vindicated by modern archaeology. Conquistador Bernal Diaz del Castillo described witnessing sacrifices at the Great Temple, where priests would open a victim's chest, extract the still-beating heart, and offer it to stone idols whose mouths were literally encrusted with dried blood. He wrote of seeing human limbs cooking in pots, of skull towers that seemed to stretch toward the heavens, of priests whose hair was matted with gore from years of ritual killing. These descriptions seemed so extreme that many historians assumed they were fabricated to justify Spanish conquest. But archaeological evidence has confirmed their basic accuracy. The skulls are real. The blood-stained altars exist. The cooking pots contain human bone fragments. The Spanish may have exaggerated numbers and embellished details, but the fundamental horror they described was genuine. What emerges from this evidence is a picture of systematic, industrialized human sacrifice, unlike anything else in recorded history. The Aztecs transformed ritual killing from occasional religious observance into the central organizing principle of their entire civilization. They created bureaucracies to manage victim procurement, developed specialized technologies for efficient killing, and established architectural monuments to celebrate their deadly devotion. Yet, even as we document these horrors, we must resist the temptation to view the Aztecs as uniquely evil. Their practices were logical extensions of their religious beliefs, no more inherently cruel than other civilizations' methods of maintaining social control. The Romans fed Christians to lions for entertainment. Medieval Europeans burned thousands of accused witches alive. The difference lies not in the capacity for cruelty, which appears universal among human societies, but in the systematic nature and religious justification of Aztec sacrifice. The psychological impact of living within such a system must have been profound and lasting. Children grew up witnessing public executions that their parents explained as necessary acts of devotion. Teenagers learned to distinguish between the screams of sacrificial victims and the cheers of celebrating crowds. Adults navigated daily life knowing that any military defeat, any diplomatic failure, any sign of divine displeasure might require increased offerings to appease the gods. The normalization of violence within Aztec society created a population capable of extraordinary contradictions. A mother might weave beautiful textiles in the morning, attend a heart extraction ceremony at midday, and return home to prepare dinner using techniques passed down through generations. A father could teach his son mathematics and astronomy while simultaneously explaining why human sacrifice was essential for cosmic balance. Children played games that mimicked sacrificial rituals, learning through play the procedures they might someday witness or participate in as adults. The priests themselves developed psychological mechanisms to cope with their roles as systematic killers. Many consumed hallucinogenic substances before major ceremonies, entering altered states of consciousness that allowed them to perform their duties without being overwhelmed by the horror. Others developed elaborate personal rituals of purification, believing that proper spiritual preparation justified their actions. Some testimonies suggest that certain priests eventually became addicted to the violence, finding in the act of killing a form of religious ecstasy that normal life could not provide. The training of new priests reveals the methodical nature of this psychological conditioning. Young men selected for religious service would begin their education by observing minor ceremonies involving animal sacrifice. Gradually, they would be exposed to human rituals, first as distant observers, then as assistants helping to restrain victims, and finally as primary executioners wielding the obsidian blades. This progression allowed them to become desensitized to violence, while maintaining the belief that their actions served a higher purpose. The victims themselves were subjected to elaborate psychological manipulation, designed to secure their cooperation. Captured warriors were often told that dying in sacrifice would guarantee them a place in the highest heaven, where they would serve as companions to the sun, God himself. Children selected for Tlaloc ceremonies were dressed as the rain god and treated with reverence, told they were becoming divine beings who would control the weather for eternity. Some victims appear to have genuinely believed these promises, accepting their fate with resignation or even enthusiasm. But archaeological evidence also reveals signs of resistance. Skeletal remains showed defensive wounds where victims attempted to protect themselves during the final moments. Some skulls display fractures consistent with attempts to escape or fight back against their captors. Hidden caches of weapons found in temple complexes suggest that even within the religious hierarchy, some individuals harbored doubts about the necessity of human sacrifice. The economic burden of maintaining this system was enormous. Beyond the direct costs of procuring victims, The Aztec state invested tremendous resources in training priests, constructing sacrificial infrastructure, and organizing elaborate ceremonies. Skilled artisans spent months creating the costumes, masks, and ritual implements required for major festivals. Professional musicians and dancers were employed to provide appropriate entertainment during multi-day sacrificial events. The entire economy was partially organized around the needs of ritual killing. The psychological toll extended beyond the immediate participants to encompass the entire population. Studies of Aztec art from the classical period reveal an increasing preoccupation with death and violence. Sculptures became more grotesque, paintings more focused on scenes of sacrifice and dismemberment. Poetry and songs celebrated death in battle and the honor of being chosen for sacrificial offering. The cultural output of an entire civilization was shaped by the omnipresence of ritualized murder. Yet this same society produced achievements that continue to inspire admiration today. The mathematical precision of the Aztec calendar surpassed anything available in Europe. Their agricultural innovations, including chinampas or floating gardens, could feed populations larger than most medieval European cities. Their architectural achievements, from the geometric perfection of temple pyramids to the engineering marvel of Tenochtitlan's canal system, demonstrated technical knowledge that wouldn't be matched by European colonizers for centuries. The coexistence of such beauty and horror challenges our fundamental assumptions about human progress and civilization. We want to believe that cultural advancement necessarily leads to moral improvement, that societies capable of creating great art and sophisticated technologies will naturally develop more humane values. The Aztec example demonstrates that this assumption may be dangerously naive. The conquistador accounts, despite their obvious bias and political motivations, provide crucial insights into how these practices appeared to outside observers. Hernán Cortés wrote to Emperor Charles V, describing temples where dried human blood covered every surface, where the stench of decomposing flesh was so overwhelming that Spanish soldiers could barely remain conscious. Diego Durán, a Dominican friar who spent decades studying Aztec culture, documented ceremonies where hundreds of victims were killed in single days, their bodies processed with industrial efficiency. These Spanish testimonies must be read carefully, understanding their authors' motivations to portray indigenous peoples as savage barbarians requiring European salvation. Yet their basic descriptions have been consistently validated by archaeological evidence. The blood was real. The skulls existed in the numbers claimed. The systematic nature of the killing was accurately reported, even if the cultural context was misunderstood or deliberately misrepresented. The collapse of the Aztec Empire in 1521 brought an abrupt end to these practices, but their psychological legacy persisted for generations. Spanish colonial records document indigenous communities struggling to understand why their new Christian overlords forbade sacrificial offerings that had sustained the universe for centuries. Some groups continued practicing human sacrifice in secret, believing that abandoning their religious obligations would bring cosmic catastrophe. The trauma of conquest was compounded by the sudden prohibition of practices that had given meaning and structure to indigenous life for generations. Imagine the psychological impact of being told that everything your civilization considered sacred was actually demonic, that the gods you had fed with human hearts for centuries were false idols deserving only destruction. The cultural devastation was as complete as the military defeat. Modern Mexico continues to grapple with this legacy. Archaeological discoveries of sacrificial sites generate intense public debate about how to interpret and display evidence of indigenous practices that violate contemporary moral standards. Museums struggle to present accurate historical information while respecting the dignity of both ancient victims and their descendants. School textbooks attempt to explain human sacrifice as a cultural practice without appearing to condone or justify systematic murder. The psychological mechanisms that enabled Aztec human sacrifice remain disturbingly relevant to understanding modern atrocities. The same processes of moral disengagement, authority-sanctioned violence, and systematic dehumanization that allowed Aztec priests to extract human hearts with clear consciences have appeared throughout history in different forms. The Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, and countless other examples of mass killing demonstrate that the capacity for systematic cruelty is not limited to any particular culture or historical period. Recent neuroscientific research has begun to illuminate how human brains adapt to extreme violence. Studies of soldiers, executioners, and others exposed to routine killing reveal measurable changes in brain structure and function. Areas associated with empathy and moral reasoning show decreased activity, while regions linked to emotional numbing and mechanical task performance become hyperactive. These findings suggest that the Aztec priests who performed thousands of sacrifices over their careers were literally different people, neurologically speaking, than they had been before beginning their deadly work. The ritual context of Aztec sacrifice provided psychological protection that made extreme violence psychologically sustainable. By framing killing as religious duty rather than personal choice, priests could maintain their sense of moral legitimacy while committing acts that would otherwise be psychologically devastating. The elaborate ceremonies, sacred locations, and divine justifications created a cognitive framework that separated sacrificial killing from ordinary murder in the minds of participants. This psychological architecture enabled not just individual priests, but entire communities to participate in or tolerate systematic violence. The religious framing transformed what might otherwise be recognized as atrocity into sacred duty. The public nature of the ceremonies created social pressure to demonstrate proper devotion through acceptance of even the most extreme practices. The integration of sacrifice into daily life made questioning these practices equivalent to questioning the fundamental structure of reality itself. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial for recognizing how similar processes operate in contemporary contexts. When violence is sanctioned by authority figures, justified through ideological frameworks, and normalized through repetition, ordinary people become capable of extraordinary cruelty. The Aztec example provides a particularly clear illustration of how sophisticated, culturally advanced societies can organize themselves around systematic killing while maintaining their sense of moral legitimacy. The ruins of Tenochtitlan lie beneath modern Mexico City, but the questions raised by Aztec human sacrifice remain painfully relevant. We've witnessed how entire civilizations can organize themselves around systematic violence while maintaining their sense of moral purpose. The archaeological evidence forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The capacity for both extraordinary achievement and unthinkable cruelty exists within every human society. By understanding these dark chapters of history, we honor the victims while learning to recognize the warning signs that could prevent such horrors from recurring in our own time.